Let's go, girls. Welcome to Talk Wealthy to Me. I'm Michelle Taylor, founder of Women in Wealth. From breaking money myths to building wealth and achieving financial freedom, we're here to empower you to create your own path. Talk Wealthy. Now, join the conversation and let's change the way women think and feel about money. Okay, ready? Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Talk Wealthy to Me. I'm so excited for our guest today, Dr. Brooke, basically an expert in all things holistic and functional medicine. She partners both the holistic practice of health with counseling as well, and is able to help so many people. I'm so excited for her to be here and share her journey with us. Brooke, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here.
I am really excited for you to share your story with the audience. For, I think, so many of us, there has been a shift into health and wellness and looking kind of beyond what the traditional way is. So you are in the holistic and functional space. Tell everybody what that means. Tell us about your business.
Oh my gosh. So I came into this space because of personal health issues, and I had no idea medicine could be holistic and we could look at root cause and explore and figure out what does and doesn't work specifically for us. I grew up in a completely conventional household when it came to that. And so I've dedicated my practice to really being on the journey. Most of my patients are women over the age of 18. And to be on the journey with them, figuring out mindset, diet, lifestyle, supplementation, detoxification, holistic practices to build a plan just for them is like the joy of my life. And it's a journey that I personally know very, very well.
So I know that journey as well. I think, for anybody listening, that I had leukemia as a kid, and as much as the doctors saved my life at that point, and it was so important, I think that it also kind of made me hate going to the doctor. And then going through IVF and just all of the things. When I was done with that, I wanted no more of traditional medicine. Now, obviously, if you break your arm, you go to the emergency room. But what I love so much about a holistic approach is it's not just about finding a quick fix or a prescription. And for some people, those things are so necessary. But I love that with what you do, you slow down and ask, why is this happening? And I think that in your world, there are so many instances that people get answers that they weren't getting with traditional medicine because they're able to actually fix a problem and change their lives. So it's got to be so rewarding.
It's so rewarding. And one of the things I love about what I do is I'm very focused on foundation, but personalizing the foundation. And since being introduced to holistic medicine, I was in a medical anthropology class where at University of Miami, I played golf there, and it introduced us to medicine all around the world. And what I started to realize is that not that conventional is bad and holistic is great, because there is good and bad in both worlds. But how medicine could actually be beautiful, like almost like replenishing. And that I found really interesting because I was so used to the very like lab, clinical, white coat, cold sort of experience that I would never have been drawn to with my personality type. But to see medicine from around the world and different ways of looking at constellations and patterns caught my eye, and I've just been loving it ever since. So, but foundation I find is a really important aspect because there's so much that we can do to shift the needle into a forward motion, where if you are going through an intense conventional treatment, you're better off because you have a foundation. For example, if you're not sleeping well, it's going to be really hard to have energy throughout the day or to really heal or for your body to do what it needs to do. And even specialty holistic practices, I find with so many of the women I'm working with, they're growth oriented, they're intelligent, they're thinking about ice baths, and they're thinking about all of these different
infrared
devices.
saunas.
Yes. And how do you begin to organize it so it doesn't drive you crazy? So it's not just that never ending to-do list. So I am really interested in personalizing foundations and sort of putting things in a category so we can choose medical choices with informed consent and intention.
Well, and it's living in that and universe. So a lot,
Yes.
sorry, I have to clear my throat. Sorry.
You're perfect.
It's, living in that and universe, just like I tell all of our listeners and my clients and friends that you don't want to do one or the other. It's kind of finding that perfect balance of doing both.
Yep.
And I think that there's space for both. I wear one of these Aura rings.
Yes.
And when you start to pay attention, it really does blow your mind that the small changes, especially with your sleep.
Yep.
My parents got me a grounding mat for Christmas.
That's awesome.
And it has made such a big difference in my sleep score. And you don't feel it, but it's
Wow.
like, oh my gosh, these little things,
Yeah.
it's really cool. And it's accessible to everybody.
Mhm.
I think that that's one of the good things about information being everywhere now, and access to information not being something that is a barrier.
Mhm.
You can figure out and do your own research and say, oh, that's something that I could do. It's inexpensive, or it's something that's worth the outcome
Mhm.
to introduce to your life. So
100%.
So how did you tell me about that journey? You were playing golf at
Yes.
U of M.
Yep.
And did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and then stumbled into this field, or was it
Yes.
backwards?
I had a grandfather. My grandparents were very important to me. And my grandfather was sort of like that bipolar personality type, but the greats were great. I mean, he would literally pick us up from kindergarten in a fire truck.
What?
And he started a nuts and bolts company, literally like nuts and bolts, talk about foundations.
Oh my God.
In his garage. And I heard stories about like him shining shoes in the Bronx and all of these different sort of like American dream sort of stories. And for Christmas, like for example, he would be Santa Claus and deck the whole house out with trains and get really into certain things. And my grandmother was more of the like, Don, his name is Don. And like, Don, let's like reel it in. Like, we've got to organize things. But I heard stories of her just simply making the most of what they had in every single step of their journey. And that always really inspired me. But of course, there are so many issues that can come with that too, like having all these outrageous things and like thinking that that's normal, and then learning how to manage a budget, especially in college. I mean, there were so many times where I swiped my debit card and it was like, oh, sorry, you can't buy this Whole Foods lunch. And I just had no idea.
Concept of it. Yeah.
And no idea how to manage money. And my dad and mom are divorced, and they were very, very different about money as well. So I always think about money and food as bringing up so many issues, and there's so much growth that can happen, and so much that we can learn to work with and appreciate when we just begin to acknowledge like what's actually there and have more transparency around it. So I love what you do, because I am going to be listening to your podcast and learning for years to come.
Having the conversations. It's so funny that you say that, because just like with me, you were surrounded by entrepreneurs
Mhm.
and by parents that were doing good things, I'm assuming.
Yep.
And like no lessons are being taught. And I don't think that it's intentional.
Yep.
I think that it just kind of happens. And it's hard then to break that cycle.
Yep.
And so much of your financial wellness is tied to your experiences growing up and what you've been exposed to. So it's like, how do we fix that missing step of having the hard conversations and the lessons? So yeah, I mean,
my grandpa was, such an entrepreneur just at heart. And my dad wasn't an entrepreneur, but he was entrepreneurial. And I always saw this freedom. Like, he would golf with his clients, and like he had this freedom, and my parents always loved what they did. So I knew that was possible. And that was sort of like the essentials I knew I wanted in a career. I didn't think I would do well working for a company. I just had too many ideas. And I actually went into University of Miami into an entrepreneurship program. So they had just started this entrepreneurship program in the business school. But after 2 years of that, I'm like, I I want to try something else. I kind of feel like I'm living my dad's dream at this point, which was better than, not being clear about any kind of dream.
Yeah.
But I was so burnt out. And that is literally what landed me in this medical anthropology class. And I had no idea how I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And once I learned about alternative medicine, I actually thought maybe I'll start a blog, maybe I'll interview people. I just wanted to keep learning about these tools that were actually helping me. And my grandfather would even go to China and bring back like scissors to sell to hairdressers at our local salon. Like, Brooke, you're going to start a scissor company. So I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that having the freedom to create my own schedule was key. And I remember later on, right before I sort of landed on this path, I remember praying every single night. Like, I don't really care what I do, but if you could make my life useful, I'd really appreciate that.
Oh.
So I really find that and looking back, I really think that that I really believe in prayer and intention and asking, whether it's universe or God, what you want, being able to identify that. I think it's
crystal
key.
Clear objectives.
Yeah.
And it's like putting it out into the universe, right? And I agree with you. I know that there's those moments where you're deep in thought and being able to give kind of your hopes up to God or the universe, whichever you, there's such a peace that comes with that. And it kind of feels like, okay, I've put it out there. It's out of my control. And then just enjoy the ride.
Yep.
So you've been in practice here in Central Florida.
Yes.
How has that been? Did you have a fast start? Did you have to pivot along the way? Tell us your business journey.
I've been in practice for just over 10 years, which is crazy to me to think about. And, I kind of went into business a bit fearless. And I was thinking about like, what does money mean to me, right? And I think growing up, it really meant freedom. But I think as I get older, it also like there's this sense of like craving security and safety, and finance represents more of that too. But going into my practice, I just knew I was very clear what I wanted to do. And I was lucky because what I do has very little overhead.
Yeah.
Even the insurance for what I do is so much less than being in the conventional world. And so I was very, very lucky to essentially have clients and patients right away to where I was breaking even. And that was a good thing, but I did have a backup plan. And I heard you on a previous podcast asking like, did you have a backup plan? And I did. It was literally to work at Starbucks and just have that nice security as I started my practice. And I would also actually work at a couple of nonprofits locally with the tools I was sharing with my patients, because I just knew in my heart, I wanted to be able to do this no matter what, whether I was getting paid or not paid. And I remember the nonprofits being like, yes, we would love to have you. And my mind was blown. I was like, really? Amazing. So I just felt like I had this like inbuilt security. Like I could still do what I love, even if I'm not getting paid for it. But luckily enough, I got paid for it, and that works out. But
well, you know what? So that I wouldn't even call that a backup plan. It was just like a means to make sure that this plan worked out for you. Like you were going to work at Starbucks to make sure that even if it was a slow start, you were going to do what you loved. And I think that is,
I was like, no matter what, I need to do this. Like it's in me. It's all I can think about, dream about, like just the way and with holistic medicine, every holistic doctor is so different. And I had this idea of like, okay, like I want to bring counseling into this. I want to get clear on the obstacles and root causes, not just physiologically speaking, but psychologically. So I'm like, how can we merge these aspects? And actually, I always knew I wanted to primarily be virtual with the ability to like go to a patient's home or be creative. And so I set my practice up that way from the beginning. Even though I was seeing people in person, I actually started at a fertility clinic, on the top of a fertility clinic, and I would work with their patients before and after IVF and different experiences. And then I moved across the street to another location in Maitland, Florida. But I always kept that part virtual practice where I was seeing people around the world too. And when 2020 hit, I was just like, oh my gosh, everything I have worked for and built, it just felt like it
fell down.
fell. But then there's this part of excitement where it's like, if this is a sign, like if you, there is not another time, like literally your dream of being fully virtual is now given to me on a silver platter,
Yeah.
lowering my overhead, and it just brought such freedom. So it's been a journey being in practice, but it's been one that's been completely worth it.
I think it's so interesting. We'll have to talk more about this offline, but in going through IVF, I went through IVF.
Mm-hmm.
There was no access to any kind of functional medicine, holistic medicine component to it, except for acupuncture,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, I don't know if it helped, but I did it and it worked. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting. So 2020 was kind of the gift on the silver platter.
Yes.
And now you're 100% virtual as well.
I'm mostly virtual, but I'm creative in terms of how I practice. So I will write a lot and do some speaking and panels. And I have this dream. I'm actually talking to a conference right now that I'm excited about, of doing like an activation in the conference. So I get some in-person time that way. But I also do work with a couple of people. This is not like my bread and butter, like day in and day out, Monday through Thursday. I'm working with people online from 8:30 to 6 o'clock at night with a 2-hour break in between. But I do work with some families in person, and I will be able to use my very, very full scope. So in Florida, I'm a holistic primary care physician, and some of my patients I'll do more counseling with, other ones I'll do more medical side with. But to be able to see people in person too, like I'll give them acupuncture actually, and I'll even go as far as to like set up their supplements for the month. So I like literally deliver them like laid out.
Oh my gosh.
And say, and a lot of people think holistic medicine has to be so expensive, but I actually find it literally saves so many of my patients money, because as a doctor, like I am very mindful of that. Like if somebody's like, hey, like I don't have the budget to work with you, I'm like, no worries. Let me send you some resources of places that you can start right now. My brothers are in sales. So they're like, Brooke, oh no, you can't. You have to work through the objections. And I'm like, that is not what I'm here to
what
do.
this is. Oh, but so okay.
Like I want to look at the budget. I want to find out what's realistic, like what we can actually integrate, because selfishly, I want to see results. Like I want to see these people like become the fullest version of themselves through health.
So what is in store for your practice in the next 5 years?
I just got engaged, I got engaged in November. I'm getting married in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
So I'm trying to be really intentional, because I definitely want kids. I would love to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
You never know what that journey is going to be like, but if it's up to me, that's what's going to happen. Yep. And I want to be really intentional about still growing my company, even if it's not like in specific ways, like where I've recently actually found a lot of peace, and I've had an assistant for 6 years. She was amazing. And we just both knew, we let each other go. It was like a moment, like we just knew. And since then, I've tried to work with a couple of other people, but recently I'm like, you know what? Even though I have leaders and people that I work with in multiple different facets of my business, I feel like they're leading me, like whether it's marketing, they're leading me. But there was something about having an assistant that I just felt like it was noisy. So I'm trying to be really intentional about like getting back to the roots, like doing everything end to end with my patients. And it's been very grounding for me. And I know, that will probably change in a couple of years. But I say that because I think in the next 5 years, like I would love to have children. And so the beautiful part about my practice is that I can work with people 1 day a week, or I could do something else. Like I can
figure it out.
Yeah, I can figure it out. And I'm excited about that. So
what did you want to do as a child? Like when you thought about what that looked like, what
I
was
wanted
that?
to be a veterinarian, and I shadowed veterinarians in like second grade, and I realized this is not what it's cracked up to be. Animals die. They
Oh my
look like
God,
they're in pain, and I was
you can't talk to
heartbroken.
them.
If I knew about holistic medicine for animals, that would have been my career,
Oh.
which is great. Actually, like it's amazing what these holistic vets are doing.
I know
So
that's a thing
it's
too.
amazing.
What do you think was the most important money lesson that you learned as a young adult?
Yeah. I was thinking about this before this podcast, and I really think it's important to let people in and give people chances, but have them earn your trust. So I think a lot in the first part of my business, I really just openly trusted people and sort of paid them before they did the work and several things like that based on empty promises. And now I'm much more intentional and specific about that. And I'll have people do small projects before we go into bigger projects and just sort of like test the waters, see how the relationship goes. And that's probably the biggest money lesson I've learned in practice. And that was a hard lesson to learn, several hard lessons there. But also now I know better questions to ask, even if it's asking, for example, for marketing or for websites, asking for examples of their work. Like, let me see your exact process and get really clear on how much they expect from me. Having clarity and transparency, I think, is really helpful.
I agree 100%. I talk about this often on the podcast within the Women in Wealth community. Yeah. I will always direct people when you're seeking out, like I call them your board of advisors, your personal board of advisors, you have got to ask questions to make sure that you're setting realistic expectations on what that relationship will look like, what you're hoping will be the outcome, how often are you talking, etc. If any of you guys want to see those questions, as always, go to talkwealthy.com. Send us a message. I will make sure that you get a copy of those. But you're right. It's so important. And people think sometimes jumping in with both feet is just, that's pulling off the Band-Aid and not taking too long to make a decision. But you want to be really intentional with your time and those initial financial decisions you're making, because it can be very expensive to have to redo somebody's work that wasn't what you were looking for, or that was something that was over-promised and under-delivered on.
I feel the same way about health too. Like when I truly believe these modalities that I'm talking of, mindset, diet, lifestyle, supplements, detox methods, practitioners, I truly believe like these practices, whether it's a supplement or practitioner, like they must earn a place in my patient's world. So like you can't just like, of course they have to be open and try things. But I've seen people go to practitioners where it's essentially they will be saying, oh, this looks like it's getting better, but my patients aren't feeling better. And they're just constantly saying like, oh, it looks like, your spine has changed or whatever it may be. And I'm like, you know what? Listen to your gut instincts and your intuition. And if you're really not noticing the progress, because I'm a firm believer that a process that yields progress brings a lot of peace. Like that is plugging into your authentic path. And I really think that people have to earn a place, like items have to earn a place like in your world. And so being open is important, but having the confidence to be able to shut things down. And that was also actually, I would say, a money mistake of mine, is like out of not wanting to have confrontation or not wanting to let a team go or something like that, hoping it'll get better.
It'll fix itself.
I was just avoiding discomfort in myself. And so to learn how to be more of my advocate, to say yes, and when I need help, and know when something's over, that's been a big lesson for me as well.
Saves you time and money.
Yeah,
absolutely. So you're getting ready to go through a big life change, getting married. And I think that it will be beneficial for us to talk through, how have you guys navigated? I know your soon-to-be husband is in the financial space as well. How have you had conversations to talk about what money management or planning will look like when you're married? And are you merging finances? Are you not? Did you talk about your credit card debt before you decided to merge finances or not? Things like that.
100%. So we've been very open with one another. And I actually think at one of my sort of like defense mechanisms is to be overly open to like see if someone will run. You know what I mean? Like, look at all these horrible things about me. Do you still want to
marry me?
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to that, we've always been very open about finances. We live together. And he was able, I think because I came into it like that, he was able to sort of open up to me about everything as well. And he has a great job. It's a very steady, like we know exactly what's coming in, and it's very
dependable.
Yes, it's amazing. And my job is a bit more like creative. I could invest here and make less money this year or not and make more, whatever it may be. So we've been really, really open with how we want that to work. And actually, believe it or not, so I grew up Catholic, and we have decided to get married in the Catholic Church and just do a small ceremony together. And they have you do this thing called pre-cana.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Like literally the courses, we did an online program. Some people go in person, but the online program, it was so helpful. It talked about like all of these amazing budgeting strategies. Like it was just such a good like little recap to get us thinking. And we have not sat down and put like a concrete budget together. But our plan is to do that in April, like of this year. And so I'm excited about that. I feel like it will be really grounding. And I think we're going to merge finances in certain ways. And then with the business, it would be a little bit different.
Sure.
So we're still exploring that, but I'm going to be listening to all of your advice.
So I can tell you one of the things that I tell clients and friends all the time when they're in a relationship where one party has W-2 consistent steady income and one is a business owner, in my opinion, the best thing that you guys can do is for you to determine what your fixed expenses are.
Okay.
And as a couple, if you say, okay, I'm going to put in 50%, you're going to put in 50%, you have the freedom of taking distributions and having the roller coaster of the wins, but also some of the valleys where something might have missed a mark. The best thing you can do is have that number that you're going to pay yourself no matter what, so that your marriage doesn't feel the roller coaster of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Because there's so many components of a marriage that are impacted by financials. I mean, we all know that's a huge reason for divorce for all of us. I mean, everyone fights over money, even when they don't mean to, right? When they're all making good decisions. But I think that that's probably the best thing that you guys can do is having you give yourself a salary, however you want to do that. So then, you know what's coming in, and then you get to have a little bit of freedom with the big wins and do something creative with those. It just having a plan in place. I think you guys are doing it the right way. Get married, get through that stressful part, and then sit down and say, okay, what is the goals that we're working towards together independently?
Yeah, we're going to lock ourselves in for 2 weekends straight and do this budget and work everything out. But that brings to mind something else. I just co-founded a company called Lead Lab early last year. And my mom and her 2 sisters own Merit Fasteners together. My grandfather's Nuts and Bolts company now passed on. And I have seen a lot with partnerships and being around business owners. And actually, that was very, very helpful in the co-founding of Lead Lab, which is a company I own with 2 professors. One is organizational science out of Pepperdine, and the other one is focused on finance. And as we were building that contract, I just was like, I want to be really clear. Like, how are we going to get bought out if something goes off? Like, and just having those really transparent. And there were certain things I was so afraid to bring up and to ask about because I didn't want to offend anyone. We were just getting this thing started, lots of cool potential. Yeah. And I'm so glad we worked through the partnership agreement together, got really clear on what we wanted to look at. And that was something I definitely learned. And I felt like going into business with people was like a marriage because I'm planning on, till death do us part kind of a thing. So.
Well, and it's so good that you brought that up because whether you are a business owner, sorry guys, this is making me like, whether you are a business owner
You're perfect.
or it's a marriage or anything in that regard, transparency is key.
Mhm.
You want to make sure that you're having the tough conversations before they're tough conversations.
Yeah.
And I talk to people all the time about this where they're like, oh, well, it's my best friend or it's my fiance. Why do we want to talk about things that could go wrong? And it's like, well, because you love each other right now.
Yeah.
But if there is an operating agreement or a budget that one person feels very strongly in a different way than you do, how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
And putting things in place, anything that has to do with money or business or marriage ahead of time, basically then it's like, this is what we agreed upon.
Yep.
Now let's go to our own separate corners, take some deep breaths and figure out how do we get this to be in a good spot.
100%. And I actually think about that with health a lot too, of like, how can we pull things out of the closet so we can see them in the light of day and like work with them in that way? Because I think sometimes actually when people have anxiety, I think they're picking up on signals of mismatch in their body, like maybe a choice isn't aligned with health. And so the more we can bring that into the open, the more trust is there. And I think about this a lot actually with relationships. When people can own that they've made a mistake or something, some people will use that against you, which is one of the reasons I think people don't do that. But it also builds a lot of trust. If they're like, hey, I did this, I saw this is what I'm working on, and they just put it out into the open. I think there's a lot of trust when we can see it and own it and work with it from that standpoint. Just so random tangent, but I was thinking about that as you were talking.
It's so true. Transparency is the key to having smoother seas, if you will. Okay. So with your wedding coming up, I think also I would love to touch on budgeting around the wedding. You and I were talking about this before the show, and you were saying that you had a budget and you were sticking to it. Has that been challenging? How has that impacted your wedding planning experience?
You know, I am so grateful that we know exactly what we have to work with. And so if we do decide to splurge on different things, it will be like informed consent choice. And actually the wedding venue that we're working with is really open and honest and wants us to genuinely have an amazing experience. And so that's been awesome. We have a meeting actually this Friday to see like what that actually looks like. But I'm starting to think in other ways of like, how can we make this as special as possible without breaking the bank? So if that means putting some things together ourselves or whatnot, I'm open to that. We have like 3 weeks to like figure all of that out. But the budget has been just having it on an Excel spreadsheet and like being able to plug in, like if we do this dinner versus that dinner and like seeing how the prices fluctuate. If we do a quarter amount, we're doing for the welcome party, we're doing like a bonfire with s'mores.
Oh, that's awesome.
So most people probably aren't going to eat the s'mores. So we asked the venue, which, you know, on paper, they don't do this. But when we asked, they decided like, yeah, we can do, you know, a quarter of the people have s'mores or something like that. So we're trying to identify what we would love to have and see how close we can get it. And that's been a lot of different questions to the venue, and also seeing like, what do we want to do ourselves, or what can we bring? Do we want to cut this? So,
but you're approaching it together, which I think is so important. Again, whether it's marriage or partnership in business, I think looking at anything that has to do with money, which can be so emotional, having a plan and approaching it together with the best end result in mind is going to make everything move so much more smoothly. And weddings can get insane. We had a really great wedding. And I tell people all the time, I look back now and I don't regret one single penny that we spent. But if I were doing it again, there are so many ways that at the end, instead of saying, how can we do this on our own? I just had that, just go ahead and do it. Let's just do it. And it definitely changed the amount that we had wanted to spend. So I'm so proud of you for doing it the way you are.
We had a conversation too. We're like, okay, do we want to press the boundaries of this and like splurge where we want to splurge? Like as if like there's no looking back. This is a one-time thing. And like, for example, we're going to Africa on our honeymoon on a very bougie safari and Seychelles trip. We're staying at the Four Seasons.
Oh my God, it's so good.
But I did not think that was going to be possible. But my little digging mind like was just like on the internet.
How can I do it?
Exactly. And I actually found this great deal at the Four Seasons where they give you a day free and include all the safaris and everything's included. So it surprisingly ended up working with our budget. But there's been a lot of digging, and both of us have decided to, like, if we do splurge in certain ways, like we don't want to regret a thing, which because we were playing with different mindsets. We're like, okay, do we want to just like save a lot as we do this and keep this as minimalist as possible because we can still make it a beautiful day if we go, but like which lane are we going to be in here?
Yeah.
And so we decided this lane, and I'm honestly pretty excited about it.
It's going to be so great.
But I'm sure there will be things I look back on and have lessons learned too.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it's just what you planned it to be and it's perfect. This is something I ask so many of the guests that are on the show. What is one piece of financial advice that you would have given yourself when you were just starting your practice?
I would say, so I have always been someone who focuses on one thing and like sort of like narrows in vision and just focuses on it. So finances wasn't even like actually a focus for me at all, but I really was afraid of it. Like looking back, I was like afraid to look at my finances. And actually the accountant I have now has been an absolute godsend of an angel. And she showed me my business in 2020 because I literally thought I was doing like horrible. Like I was not doing enough. I didn't have enough, all of these different things. She's like, Brooke, she was the first person ever to be like, Brooke, you are doing great. Your business is flourishing. Like, look at you. And I'm like, wait, how did you come to that conclusion? Because
show me so I can show myself.
Yeah, and I'm literally, and she was so simple and gentle in her approach with me and just walked me through everything as if I was a kindergartner, which is exactly what I needed. So I think if I was starting my business, I would say like the people who you work with really matter. If you don't feel right around it, or if it's bringing more questions than answers, that's something to pay attention to.
Oh yeah.
And I really think like looking at the numbers is key, but in that space, like when I knew nothing about numbers, to be able to have a third party objective who can just walk you through it with a good heart, like that's just been something that I wish I had from the beginning.
Oh yeah, and that's so important to touch on because you guys, there are professionals out there that will simplify it and take the time to invest in the conversation that you're having and making sure that you're not leaving with questions. Yeah. You're going to encounter people that are going to talk to you and use really big words and try and make themselves sound qualified. But what often happens is when people start talking so far above where your level of understanding is in any kind of conversation, you like check out.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to surround yourself with the people that you feel comfortable asking the right questions to, that will celebrate your wins, point out opportunities, and ultimately just make sure that you know where you're at. And that's one of those things where it's, I know it can be scary to look under the hood and say, oh man, we're doing this exercise to figure out how much I spent last month on fun and food and discretionary things. And people are like, I don't even want to look. The reality is, once you look, it gives you such a level of peace and comfort of what you're working towards and where your opportunity is. And that ties into what you do because your health is impacted by stress and so many other things that as much as we can eliminate the guessing in any part of our life, having the hard conversations that most of us don't want to have, and sticking up for yourself, being your own advocate, doing the research, finding what works best for you is going to impact you not only in those areas, but in your own health and wellness as well.
100%. Noise, I call a lot of like that stress, like any mismatch or lack of clarity, it's just like expensive. It's so expensive and it's exhausting because even if you don't think you're thinking about it, it's subconsciously and unconsciously rolling around in the background. So the more you can like take it out and like look at it and work on it, it's just peace of mind just stems from that.
Absolutely.
So I'm huge fan. And yeah, that was extraordinarily helpful. And I keep meeting amazing women who are able to have that sort of like non-intimidating, approachable, like very it's been such a blessing to meet certain people. And I mean, that sounds so skeptical.
No,
Certain
I know
people.
what you mean.
But certain people. And because actually when I was first in business, I really had a hard time like trusting different people I would network with, and it kind of, the vibes were off. And obviously I was insecure starting my own business, but I'm so glad I stuck in, like hung in there and opened up to meeting all kinds of people, because now I'm like, wow, yeah, you feel it when you're around somebody who's your cheerleader and that
Oh,
you can
yeah.
truly like pour into them, and there's this like amazing reciprocity that can take place. So we're just grateful for this journey.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me and the audience today. Tell everybody where they can follow you, reach out, where is best.
Absolutely. Instagram is great. My website is great. It's just drbrooksstewart.com or at drbrooksstewart on Instagram.
Brooke, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I loved hearing your story, and I know that the audience will as well. And of course, to you all, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Talk Wealthy to Me, where we are changing the way women think and feel about money. Make sure, as always, to like, subscribe, rate, follow, and share so we can keep this community growing.